Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the graveyard shift. I hope you have some water and some stuff with you as well. So today we're going to take you through, like what Angelo mentioned, the case study that we performed at the ARC itself. And the case study revolves their supply chain function, their procurement function, and some of the challenges that they have experienced and what they are looking to do to overcome some of these challenges to improve themselves as a procurement function. So we're going to start off with what did we actually do? What was the mandate of the project itself? So just 1 second. Yeah, so we needed to provide an objective third-party review of what's actually happening within their supply chain and their procurement function. So initially what happened was the procurement team internally and the internal audit function conducted some research, and they said, listen, there's several challenges that we're experiencing. There's things that we're seeing that is not kosher. How do we improve this function? How do we get to a stage that is mature as an organization that can deliver value for money for the organization? And so with PURCO and ProcureSense combined, we went in and we enabled them to understand all of these challenges, but also to ratify what they found. Is their thinking aligned to what they're seeing? Is that aligned to best practice? Is that aligned to legislation? What are we seeing as a third-party service providers as to what's happening in the market? And so we had to review all of their documentation. We had to provide them with recommendations in terms of what should be their journey map, what should be their next stages and their next steps if they were to go through this process. We were supposed to also identify any of their alignments in terms of their public legislation, and then finally to provide them with an actionable implementation plan for them to go about implementing these solutions to bring about the change within their organization. And so when we went through this process, we followed several different methodologies, but to bring it down to something that's very simple to understand, we followed a qualitative and a quantitative data approach. So what do I mean by that there? In very simple terms is qualitative being we needed to understand from people on the ground what's actually happening within the organization. So if I may ask, how many people here are in the procurement function or in public sector? Right, a few people, right? So can I say that I know your procurement function better than you? I don't, right? You know your procurement function, you know your organization better than anybody else would because you're operating in that environment. And so qualitatively, we needed to interview people, we needed to get the voice of customer, we need to understand exactly what they're experiencing on the ground, the good, the bad, the ugly. And that's from a qualitative perspective. From a quantitative perspective, we needed to interrogate their data. And for us, we always believe that data does not lie. When we see the data can be presented and it'll tell you the truth, it'll tell you exactly what that single source of truth is looking like. And why is that important is because we need to bring all of these worlds together, and we bring these worlds together for the purpose of telling the complete story as to what's actually happening within this organization. And when you bring qualitative and quantitative data, there's a convergence point where the truth comes out, and the truth is there to help you identify, this is where I am, this is where I need to be, and these are the gaps and what I would need to do to make those changes. And so to first understand where they were as an organization, to paraphrase Peter Drucker, it says, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. If you can't manage it, you can't improve it. And so we had to first go through that data state approach where we had to identify what is your as-is state as an organization from a qualitative data perspective and a quantitative data perspective, and that's the process that we followed. One of the metrics that we utilized was to identify the maturity of the organization from a procurement perspective, and through that process, that came out through our analysis of their data, analysis of their systems, their technology, their people, their skill sets, their data integrity itself, and also through the voice of customers. And so we gathered that data together, and through our assessment, we identified that the organization is somewhere between a level 2 to a level 2.5 in terms of their procurement maturity. Now, this may be seeming like, well, listen, for a public sector entity, how can they be so immature in terms of their procurement maturity? I've worked across multiple organizations. I've consulted to multiple organizations. I'm yet to see one organization that operates at a level 5 in the context of South Africa. We think we have very mature systems and very mature technology, very mature data, very mature governance. But when we look at what the world is doing as a country, our procurement systems, our supply chain functions are very immature in comparison to what the rest of the world is doing. And so when we analyzed and assessed where this organization was, we said, well, listen, they're actually not far off from where we think or where we envisage them to be, and we do know that there's steps that they can take to get to the next stage. When we looked at the data maturity, they were sitting at a level 1 to a level 2 in terms of data maturity, and there we looked at integrity of the data, we looked at the quality of the data, we looked at what information can we glean from the data, and more importantly, what insights can we generate out of the data. Because I'm sure as procurement people, you guys may know that data is one thing, information is something else, and insights from data is something completely different, right? Because you can have a vast array of data, but if you can't glean the insights from that data, it's as useless as just writing 1 + 1 = 2. You need to gather the insights from that data. And so when we looked at the data for the organization, we understood that because of their transition to a new ERP solution, a new system, that the data was fragmented, they had disparate systems and data that were sitting across multiple divisions that they were utilizing. And in that day, it presented challenges because they could not leverage economies of scale, they could not operate as one single unit in terms of understanding the data and using the data to their advantage. Moving on from there, I just want to make sure we're on the same slide. So that's just talking about where they are in their data. And when we're looking at the procurement maturity, we're looking at the data maturity, we're looking at it from a perspective of people, process, systems, technology, and governance. And how are all of these worlds working together? And when we're looking at the people aspect, we're looking at the skill sets of the individual staff. Are they at the level to be performing the activities and the tasks that is assigned to them? And I use this analogy when we presented this to the committee, is consider an organization or a restaurant that is equipped to deliver 200 pizzas. Their infrastructure, their systems, their processes, their equipment in the kitchen is only designed to produce 200 pizzas every single day. Now you've gone and you 4x'd that organization's output, and you are still giving them the same resources, but expecting them to deliver 4x of that value. Does anybody think that's possible? Anyone? Nobody, right? Because you can't expect to use the same systems, the same technology, the same resources to deliver something that's 4 times cumbersome, 4 times of the volume of what you were previously doing. And so that was one of the key findings that we determined in this process, through our process of auditing them and understanding their systems and their data, their technology and their people, is that their output significantly increased, but their resources that they were given remained stagnant, remained the same. And so the committee expected further improvement from the organization without saying, here's the investment that we're giving you within your function as procurement and supply chain to ensure that you can deliver at that value. And so where did we want to see the organization migrate towards? We want to see them migrate from a current state of a level 1/level 2 in data and a level 2/level 3 in procurement maturity, moving them up the chain into a level 3 or to a level 4. Now, as you guys would know, that the path to progress is not a straight line. It is a staged approach. And so we came up with a 36-month roadmap and a plan for the organization to help them drastically improve and to get there in a staged process. You guys would know that when it comes to procurement, and more especially procurement in a public sector environment, sometimes it is slow to move, it is slow to make decisions, and so we can't expect change management to happen overnight. We've got to stage the changes with the organization. And I'll pose a question to you, within your organizations, what are some of the changes that you think you can start bringing into your organization? Because often at times, as entrepreneurs, people think that we are only working in our business when we should be working on our business. As intrapreneurs in your organization, you are so invested in working on your processes, working on your transactions, that you're not working on the organization or on your department. So how can you improve your department? How can you improve your data quality? How can you improve your processes and your governance? What measures can you bring in place to help your function and your department move to the next level? And that is a staged approach. You can't expect to take a presentation to your CFO or to your CPO and then for them to say, listen, here's 10 million Rand, go ahead and conquer. That's never going to happen. They're going to expect you to put in the effort and for you to say, if we do this, we expect to see these results. If we do this, we expect to see these results. And so some of the changes that we have recommended for this council was for them to go through the process of identifying what is the optimal operating model for them. As I mentioned earlier, when you're talking about a restaurant going from 200 pizzas per day to 800 pizzas per day, you can't expect them to have the same infrastructure. So what is that operating model looking like? How much of capacity do you need? What does your processes look like? What does that need to change in order to accommodate the different types of pizzas that you're now going to be manufacturing, the different kinds of other culinary cuisines that you're going to be producing and the output from there off as well? Do you need different kinds of equipment? And so when you're looking at this within your internal organization, start giving yourself that view to say, how can I make an incremental small change? And when I make that change, what is going to be the business impact? What's going to be the value for money that my organization is going to achieve if I make one simple change? If I change a delegation of authority, is that going to 10x our output? Is that going to increase our turnaround time by another 10 or 20 days? And those are some of the things that we would encourage you guys to start looking at, because that will bring the difference and the change that you need in your organization. So I'm just going to pause there for a second, because I know we're speaking about one case study relative to what we've done. But as you guys may realize, that this is not unique to only one organization. Whether it be public sector or private sector, organizations across industries in South Africa and Africa at large are experiencing these same challenges. And so I'm just going to ask Angelo, who was also part of that project. Angelo, you've worked across multiple organizations, multiple projects. With what you've seen in public sector, is it unique to only one organization that you've seen this, or have you seen it portray itself in multiple different entities?
So, thank you, Preston. Hello? Thank you, Preston. So this is definitely not unique to the ARC. There's many organizations that are going through many changes in the environment, whether it's internally or externally. Some of them are embarking on significant projects that suddenly change the spend profile of that organization over a fixed period, whether it be a few years, and they're not necessarily geared to meet those challenges. Mm-hmm. Some organizations just have concerns about potential bottlenecks, data maturity, and things of this nature. And there are organizations that do the sort of self-assessment and to consider interventions, the scale of the interventions. But I think what is key to this process was that it was an independent assessment, that it was with a view to enhance the internal process, with a view for continuous development that came within the business and was supported by us as PURCO. And these are the type of interventions that we can do and that we'd like to do more often for other organizations, to help them to locate where they are and provide them with that roadmap, as you mentioned, to get to where they would like to be, and to help them to deal with the challenges that they may be experiencing internally, but are not able to exactly put their thumb on it. Yeah. Some of these things you're only able to identify when you are looking at the end-to-end process, without the finger pointing, without concern of...
well, that's the difference with working in your process versus working on your process, right?
Exactly that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I found, and this intervention gave that view of some of the challenges, and I think it was well received by the management as well, because it rang true in terms of what they were experiencing within the business.
Yeah, thanks Angelo. So I'm just going to touch on some of the key findings and some of the risk areas that we found within this assessment. One of that being the operating model, like I've touched on. The organization also had a high vacancy rate and a skills shortage from what we understood in the supply chain function. As I mentioned, their data analytics or their data integrity was not at the standard that was going to allow them to make insightful decisions. When we look at some of their policies and the SOPs, it was not designed for the 4X that they were experiencing. And so in order for them to get to that 4X and to operate at an efficient, optimal level, we would need to redesign some of their policies, some of their SOPs, some of their terms of reference in terms of how they would operate. And then, we also need to put some simple things in place, like panels, preferred supplier list. We need to look at economies of scale. What we've seen often in public sector is a lot of these organizations work in silos. So they're one organization, but they have different regional sort of offices, they have different business units, and somebody could be buying something as simple as stationery here, and across all other provinces, they're also buying stationery, whereas we could just leverage something as simple as economies of scale. And that's where I'm saying for your organization, start looking at some of these things where you're saying, it's going to take you an extra hour, a week, to look at some of the data. What can you mine out of this here? What can you bring of value to your organization to say, if we do this, we've reduced the transaction time by 3 days. We've saved the organization between 2% and 3%. And one of the outcomes of this process that the ARC would receive is that they will see a 3 to 7%, and this is just our initial assessment, a 3 to 7% improvement on their operational efficiency and between a 5 and 10% savings on their procurement. And those are simple metrics that we can pull. If you look at, I think it's PwC, they've got 64 levers from a cost savings perspective that you can pull. This is pulling one lever, and they can potentially save between 5 and 10%. And that is true for most organizations, be it public sector or private sector. So how many of you guys think that you guys can provide savings in your organization? Anybody? 1%, 2%. Yeah, right? So we all can provide some level of savings. Whether you're operating in a company that's got a procurement spend of 10 million or 1 billion, savings are savings. There's always bottom line savings to be achieved. Then touching on some of the immediate impact areas that we believe that they should attend to, it was their policies and their procedures to bring everybody in the organization to alignment and standardization. It was about providing the bid committees with a lot more credence and guidance in terms of how they should go about their activities. It was about getting reporting in place, because if they could not see their data, they were not going to be able to make decisions against the information and their data. We were going to go through a process of redesigning the delegations of authority. And again, as you can understand, if their procurement spend went up by 4 times, so did the number of transactions go up by 4 times. And so you're sitting with the CPO, you're sitting with the CFO, the CEO, now having to approve 4 times more transactions than they needed to in the past. Their time is more valuably spent on strategic items as opposed to tactical items. And so we were going to redesign their DOA as well. Then look at their systems and their technology, because if you don't have your systems informing you relative to your process, you're going to be having a process that looks great and manually can operate perfectly, but when it comes to implementation of your system does not support your process. And so you need to align your systems to your processes that are optimized. And then we were just going to be looking at how do we reduce disparate spend and how do we consolidate spend across all of the different business units that they had. Like I mentioned, some of the savings that they would see, the savings or the percentages I gave you earlier were rounded up percentages. But in phase 1 of the project, they would see between a 3 and 4% saving in terms of the efficiency gains. In phase 2, which was going to be month 13 to month 24, was going to be between a 3 and a 5% savings in terms of their process optimization. And then finally, in phase 3, which was going to be the last 36 months, it was going to be between 5 and 10% of their savings from a savings perspective on procurement bottom line savings. So that's direct impact to the P&L that they would receive just by implementing a 36-month journey of getting some of their governance, their process, the data, their systems, and their teams in place to achieve some of these things. So just telling people what's wrong with their business is not good enough, because anybody can do that there, and it's very easy to paint that picture. But how would they go about actually making some of these changes? And some of the things that we recommended for them in their 36-month journey was to look at enhancing of their policies and their procedures. Aligning it to what is their current state and their future state. We can't just be designing something for where you are as an organization now when we know you've already 4x'd in the last 3 years. We perceive that you are going to 5x in the next 5 years from now. How do we design your policy, your procedures, your data integrity, your data architecture to cater for your 5-year plan? We need to look at the delegations of authority to make sure that we don't put too much of onerous on the executive members, but also provide them with a view that's saying, from an operating model perspective, how do you have a center-led approach with the decentralized operations and giving autonomy to your different business units in your different regions as well. And so designing all of those systems in place and integrating that is going to give them the best bang for buck and make sure that they are operating at the optimal state. We would then have to look at the capacity building within procurement itself. And again, this is not a function of people just not knowing not knowing procurement itself. It's just that based on how the business has grown, people had to be pushed into roles to do things that they aren't affair with. And so you can't expect a plumber to go and do an electrician's job, right? In the same way, we can't expect somebody who's a store's clerk to go and do a RFP for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 million rand. And so there would need to be a drastic upskilling of staff within the organization and capacitation of that staff as well. We would need to improve on their operational efficiency, and that again is coming back to their systems, because their systems was not aligned or integrated with what their operating model was currently like, and we would redesign some of their technology stacks in order to improve that for them. And finally, to provide them with some reporting, right? Because again, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, you can't improve it. And so a lot of times organizations don't have visibility of what are they actually spending on. How much of money are they spending on laptops? I'll give you a very quick case in point. I had a meeting yesterday with one of the top 3 independent power producers in South Africa. They literally went from a 30-man business to a 300-man business in a space of 2 years. Revenue went from 1 billion rand to about, I think, 15 billion rand in a space of 3 years. The CFO does not know how much of laptops they have in the organization. He does not know why is a personal assistant or administrator getting a 50,000 rand laptop and they're only giving him a 20,000 rand laptop. Purely because they have growing pains. And it's the same thing that happens in most organizations. It's a growing pain. All of a sudden, things just happen. Sales increases, funding increases, revenue increases. The number of responsibilities you have as an organization, your mandate may change. And all of a sudden, all of these things are converging, but you've got no methodical way of approaching this here. And so one of the things that we suggest is just putting it down in paper, right? And you do that because you need to have a map. You need to have a roadmap. You need to understand this is where I am, and you need to be real about where you are, because often at times when you tell people this is your current state, they don't believe it. They think the data is lying. And when you show them what the data is like, they actually then start saying, you're actually right. This is exactly where we are, and the gap to where we want to be is significant, and how do we get there? And how do you get there is through having horsepower. One of the ways in which you get horsepower is through people like PURCO. You onboard PURCO, they help you in your organization to provide you with that horsepower to come in as an impact project, get things running for you, get you up and running to the point of saying it's enough for you to manage on your own, and where you can say, how do we front load these things? So how do we do a 36-month project in a space of 12 months? How do we capacitate your teams to take over from the 12 months, from the 24 months, into the next 36 months, into the next 60 months? Right? So you're not going to be able to do this if you're only relying on working in your business and not working on your business. And because of capacity constraints, we understand you need horsepower to work on your business. So I'm just going to jump very quickly into the demo page. Yes, here we go. So one of the things that we do as an organization in our partnership with PURCO is, again, we make data make sense. We want to take data to information to insights. And so when we look at data, we start merging several different data sets, whether it be your accounts payable data, your procurement data, your supplier data, sustainability data, or BE data, and we bring that into one central point of truth, and that's what our data sets look like. So these are very interactive dashboards. If you click on any of those circles, you'll see the dashboards increase and the dashboards change. And so we can show you spend by different categories, by different commodities, by different SKUs. We can forecast your spend. We can tell you the number of purchase orders that you've got. We can even move on to the next menu item, where we can start telling you how, what are you spending on a material, and what are you paying for this material from Preston Pty Limited versus from Angelo Pty Limited. Why are you paying 2 rand more from Preston when Angelo is literally down the road? He's a black-owned supplier. He's got all the credentials. He's a local supplier, but you are choosing to not spend with that kind of supplier. We're able to cascade that data all the way to your SKU level. We can tell you what the quantity of spend is with a vendor, what percentage of commodity they own within your business. We can tell you what your peaks and your troughs are. As an example, beverage companies, their peaks and their troughs are in Easter and also in the December period. And so we help them cater for what their spend profiles are looking like, how they raise capital during those periods of time, how we help them reduce working capital at those periods of time as well. If you go on to the next menu item, we also then give you a view of what does your data look like from a contract versus a non-contract perspective. Where is most of your contract items sitting at? Most companies will tell you they've got 80% of spend under management. That's not true. They don't have 80% of spend under management. They just have 80% of the data, but the data is not giving them any insights at all. And so we help you understand what is contracted, what is not contracted, where are those evergreen contracts sitting, that those evergreen contracts can no longer be evergreen, and they can start being dispersed to people of the right demographics. And we start giving you by your material groups what your spend, what your forecast is there as well. We also then look at the next menu item, which is cost savings. And in this example, we're just looking at one of the levers of cost savings, which is your working capital and your accounts payable data. A real case, I can't share with you guys the actual information of the company, but one of our major clients, we helped them save over 750 million rand of working capital. What did they use that money for? They used it for expansion projects. So they rolled out another 4 other manufacturing sites. They used about 350 to 400 million rand of that working capital to expand their facilities. They recouped that money tenfold just by bringing on other sites. So again, in your organization, how can you start putting some of these levers in place to make sure your organization is getting the best bang for buck? Something as simple as payment terms. We've contracted with suppliers for 30-day payment terms, and we're paying them in 7 days and 10 days. But a contractual obligation is that we should pay them in 30 days. That differential of the 20 days is interest sitting in the bank that your organization could have made money on. Right? And we may think, okay, it's only, it's an invoice for 1,000 rand. What happens when it's an invoice for 10 million and for 100 million rand? It has a significant impact on the organization. And so that's just looking at one lever that we pulled on that there. And then working capital, like I mentioned, we helped them realize about 750 million rand of working capital. And another methodology that we utilized in the last menu item is you guys may be familiar with the Kraljic matrix or the Kraljic model of positioning your leverage suppliers against risk. One of the ways, if you can go to the last menu item, please. Yep. We've created a methodology of applying a localized view, a truly African view on what procurement risk is relative to the profit impact to an organization. And everything that's sitting in the red there, that is speaking more to what we would call sustainability, what we will call ED, SD spend, and what we will call procurement cost savings. All sitting in a sweet spot. There's a methodology that we apply to get to these graphs. And that's something that we apply even at the council as well when we move on to the next phase of the project with them. So yeah, in a nutshell, there is significant savings sitting within your organization. There's significant improvements sitting within there. You're not going to have all the knowledge all the time, or the capacity all the time, and you would need to bring in organizations like PURCON to come in to say, how do we shift the needle? How do we get rapid deployment of solutions to get stuff done in a quick way that's going to bring the results that your executives are going to like and that you are going to shine within your department. To close off on this, in terms of what that implementation plan looked like for our client, we gave them a 12-month, a 24-month, and a 36-month roadmap. One of the important questions that was asked of us in our presentation to them is, how can we condense this? You condense this by horsepower, and you're getting a lot more team members involved, and so you could run multiple sprints, and so each of these ticks on there are sprints. Each of those sprints could be run in parallel with each other. Some can't, but some of them can be. So more often than not, year 1 and year 2 sprints can be run in parallel. And so your systems, your data, your technology, your people, that you can run in parallel. Your more strategic items, like looking at your future state of what the operating model in year 5 looks like versus your year 1, year 2, year 3 looks like, that can only happen at a later stage. But a lot of things can be condensed at that point in time as well. You can also outsource some of your requirements to buy you that horsepower, right? Because there's people within your organization that needs to be involved in this project here because they know the project and they know what's happening on the ground better than we do. As we start growing and learning over time with our clients, we're able to say, well, we understand your world as well as you understand it. but we want to transfer the skill to our clients to make sure that at the end of 24 months to 36 months, they know what we know and they can go forward and conquer. They can go and make this 36-month journey into a 60-month journey, and they can say, here's the next lever, and here's the next lever, and here's the next level of the ladder that we can climb up. And so that's what our plan is with all of our clients when we engage with them, is that we never want to keep the information to ourselves. We always want to upskill our clients to get them from a level 1 maturity or a level 2 up to a level 4, possibly a level 5, whether it be in procurement, whether it be in the data, but to help them shift the needle to bring about savings. And why is this important? Because for the country, it's important. We believe that if we change the narrative and if we change the way in which procurement is done within the public sector, and we remove corruption, we remove this plagiarism that sits within the selection of suppliers, that we can bring about the difference, that we can be one of those countries in the African continent that says, guys, look at us, we're doing things right. We've made the right decisions, we've made the right changes within our country, within our ecosystem, and we can be the change that's required. I think the context far too long has been that South Africa is too corrupt and that our public sector is too corrupt, and there's so much of nonsense happening, but I believe that through applying these kinds of methodologies, partnering with companies like PURCON and ProcureSense, that there will be such a significant change to the people of our country and the people of color within our country as well. I'm going to leave it at that, and I'll just open up for any questions if there are any.